Hey everyone, I'm Clip, and today's point of discussion is to do with card segmentation, right? So we've got all the sets laid out here, all the way up to the new bright lights, okay? So what I've done is I've looked at all the heroes that make up Classic Constructed, right? So this is the biggest section of play for Flesh and Blood, right? It has the highest prize pool, and therefore that attracts the highest amount of players. If you were to do this same table in regards to, say, Blitz, well, it'd still come out somewhat similar, because for every hero that you're adding to the young side, for instance, the total pool, right, you're adding a similar amount of heroes to the left side by way of actually being able to play them, or them featuring in X set. So, what do we have? Well, for instance, Welcome to Wraith, right? 4 out of 4. 100% target demographic. Draftable. Okay, so in Welcome to Wraith, we have Bravo, Dorinthia, Katsu, and Reiner. They're the only 4 heroes to exist, and therefore, all the cards in Welcome to Wraith were applicable to every single player at its inception and release. Okay, it's really, really worth noting, because then, as we continue across this table, as we go from set to set to set, what you can see is we're getting less and less coverage of the core demographic of players for Flesh and Blood. Right, so again, Welcome to Wraith, 4 of 4. Arcane Rising steps it up, right? We introduce our Ranger, Azalea, Mech Dash, Wizard Kano, and Vizari Runeblade. Okay, so our 4 of 4 now becomes 4 of 8. Arcane Rising has a core demographic of technically 50% of the player base. Now, it would, in all cases, most likely be a lot greater, right? And this is the second set, so the majority of people who are playing, Bravo, playing Dorinthia, Katsu, well, they're still going to check out the heroes of Arcane Rising. They're going to get a feel, and they might transition, they might swap, and altogether, right, because it's still only 4 of 8, because there are only collectively 8 heroes and 2 sets to pick from, right, you're going to have more absorption and more consumption of the product across the player base. Now, True, our first supplemental set. It did introduce Cheyenne and Cavaden. I always hate pronouncing that. Right, am I saying it correctly? Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, so 2 new heroes, Merchant and Shapeshifter. Granted, again, they're not meta relevant. They're not play relevant, really. And again, we're not doing Blitz. Okay, so for all intents and purposes, 8 of 8. It has cards for every single hero currently in the game. Okay, 4 of 4, now 4 of 8, 4 of 8, and then 8 of 8. Okay, so Crucible is the joining product. Okay, it's meant to, again, hit 100% of the demographic of players, and therefore have the largest uptake in terms of the product. Okay, now, Monarch, this is where things start to get a little bit complicated, because we get the introduction of the subtypes, right? So we have Light and Shadow. So although we have Runeblade, it's now Shadow Runeblade. And although we have Warrior, it is now Light Warrior, right? So, in red, these are the core heroes, if you will, right? Because some cards are still applicable, but for the majority of the set, right, the light cards are not. So although there are a fringe amount of base warrior cards, base brute cards, and Runeblade cards, there might not necessarily be a desire for them from the demographic of players. Altogether, we're adding more and more slices to our pie, right? More and more toppings, and in most cases, you'll have people who don't care, they'll eat anything on the pizza, right? Then you'll have people who are disgusted by X topping, pineapple, take it or leave it, right? And they will stop. They won't care for the set, right? Because, again, it doesn't have the toppings that they want. They don't want to touch it. Even if they want the warrior cards, even if they want the brute cards, the Runeblade cards, they'll just pick them up off the secondary market. They're not going to appreciate Monarch for Monarch necessarily. And then, of course, right, you have the people who just want Monarch toppings, so to speak, right? They're not really from the original sets where these heroes featured, and they're just here to play the new variants. Altogether, right, the demand for Wraith, Arcane Rising dwindles, because now it's not 4 of 4, it is 4 of 12, 4 of 12, 8 of 12, and with Monarch, right, you can either say it's 4 or 7 of 12, right? Prism obviously is the only illusionist, so it doesn't have a base variant to compare to, but in either regard, right, whether it's 33% or still around that 50% target demographic. In either regard, you have ramped up production, right? We know the print runs for this, right? Monarch has a far higher print run than the alpha version of Welcome to Wraith, and its unlimited version is at least equivalent, if not greater, okay? So altogether, the print run is higher. despite, again, having a segmented card pool, having less overall interest in the product from, again, the majority of play, right? You might be someone who opens every product. I open every product, right? But there are people who are just here to play, or people who are just here for the heroes that they enjoy, the lore that they enjoy, and therefore they're not necessarily interested in Monarch, right? They might not care for the toppings, they might completely hate the toppings, or they might be happy to eat anything because it's just a topping, right? So then we get Everfest. Again, addition of another subtype, Elemental this time. Elemental's a bit more palatable because a lot of the cards aren't just a straight split, right? All the heroes feature 2 except for Icelander, right? Altogether, it's still segmenting the player base even further, right? So again, 4 of 16 if you want to just consider it the core heroes of the set. If you want to rope in their base variants, right? There's cards for Lexi, there's cards for Azalea in Tails, then it's still 8 of 16, still that 50% demographic. But we do still see the amount of production increased, right? Again, we can't say it's proportional to the player base because any growth in the player base, right? We've already gone through the whole idea that growth in the secondary market isn't growth for Legends of Studios, but there's also now this interpretation where any growth in the player base isn't direct growth for the game, because if they come into the game and they are just die-hard Runeblade people, right? They're only going to play Runeblade. That's all they have an interest in. Or they only play Mechanologist because they only like cyberpunk themes or something like that, right? There are people like that, okay? Then they're not growing the entirety of the play base with each set. So to ramp up production in relation to that is a misstep. We get Everfest, okay, back to 100% saturation because it's a supplemental set. Uprising, 3 new heroes, a whole new subtype, right? So again, 3 of 19 or 6 of 19, depending how you look at it. Even in this case where it's 6, right? Because now we're seeing this 3 hero model. Even if you regard it as that 6 of 19, right? So 6 heroes out of the entirety of the hero pool for Classic Constructed. That's 32% of the player base, or the playable heroes, I should say, being targeted with Uprising. Okay, so to have Uprising printed to the same volume as Monarch, same volume of Tails or Everfest, right, is unthinkable. In all honesty, the more I've looked into it, it can't have a high print run because, again, the amount of demographic that it's hitting, right? Yes, there'll be people who will love dragons, don't play Illusionists, but they want the dragons. There'll be people who love the themes, so they'll come and partake. There's all these other variables, sure. But at the root of it, in terms of expanding play, right, at best, 6 of 19 heroes are being approached with this set. So it can't have the same volume as Monarch, where again, we have that higher rate of 58% versus 32, or even 33% versus 16. Now, in retrospect, all these sets now also suffer because we are expanding that denominator, right? Instead of 17, it's 19. Instead of 16, it's 19. Instead of 4, it's 19, right? Welcome to Wraith now has close to the worst saturation in hindsight, right? So what incentive is there for new players to go grab Welcome to Wraith? Again, if they're not interested in those 4 core heroes. Just food for thought. Okay, back to Dynasty, right? Back to 2020. Right, 100% saturation, 100% coverage. We get the new Assassin, so there's actually more value to Dynasty, in my perspective, than other supplemental sets, because you want it for those core Assassin cards. Outsiders is a bit more interesting, because it's a bit more grounded. I've just included it as covering, like, Faye, Lexi, as the subtype heroes, right, because these are all base cards. So 32% is what I've chalked it up to. You could do the whole bracket thing again, right, and say, well, they're not elemental cards, so you're probably just going to run the elemental cards for Lexi over the base cards. But there's going to be some base cards in Outsiders that you want for those specialized heroes, those heroes with subtypes. So again, 32%. Overall, we've moved away from this 50% coverage to 32%. We get Dusk Till Dawn, the worst saturation coverage, whatever you want to call it, for a supplemental set. Okay? At worst, 29%. If you want to be insanely generous and you want to say that the handful of Majestics for other heroes, right, are relevant, make the set applicable to a larger portion of the play base of the community, then 58%. Still hovering around that 50% mark. Okay? We have not seen any product to date, right, so from today, cover the entirety of play. Dusk Till Dawn doesn't do that. It doesn't cover the new heroes introduced, right? Dynasty is close, but there's still 4 new heroes, right, by way of Riptide. Yes, this card's applicable, but Riptide is, a different playstyle to Azaria. So what was thought up and released in Dynasty might not necessarily be fully applicable for Riptide. Okay, so in retrospect, all these supplemental sets, every single set diminishes as we continue to progress. So overall, as we continue to expand, as the player base grows, production cannot grow equally. And I really, really hope that this has been hammered home to Legend Story Studios, and they actually do value that and have thought of that when it comes to the eventual print runs we will see for these newer sets. Okay, and then we have Bright Lights. So I've decided just to add it at the moment, right? It's 2 of 25, right? The expectation is that it's Darnadol Dash and the new Teklo. No, not Teklo, Niklo, right? So 2 of 25, possibly, right? Possibly higher again if they go the combo card route, so that they can still do the crack shuffle play mentality mechanic, whatever you can, new revitalization to drafting, but then still have cards applicable to everyone else, right? But yeah, 8% core set, a set. Yeah, I'm sure there's people who will love the theme. Again, Mechanologist hasn't been touched. Where's Dash, right? Arcane Rising, Crew, supplemental cards, yeah, supplemental cards, but no core set has touched Mechanologist until now, right? That's a big gap, right? Especially in years. That's a few years of a gap. So yes, there'll be people who want the Mechanologist cards, but at the same time, right? If Dust Till Dawn is, say, 200,000, if Outsiders is, say, 200,000, we can't expect Bright Lights to be 200,000. That just doesn't make sense from a business perspective for me, right? That would be ludicrous for them to do. To print Bright Lights, a highly specialized set, more specialized than Dust Till Dawn. Yes, it has a draftable element, but it's still highly specialized. At this moment, we can only conclude that it's 8% of the demographic of playable heroes. So to say its print run will be equivalent to these other sets is just something I'm not happy to do, right? It has to be diminished. It has to evaluate these principles and factor them in, right? We'll scroll down now, okay? So we have Welcome to Wraith. We have the print volumes, okay? In total, Monarch, being generous, 1-to-1 ratio, right? So 250,000. Same with Tales and Everfest, 1-to-1. Right, again, we've gone over the line of dialogue, the thoughts, and the perspective that the first edition can't be necessarily less than unlimited, right, given their mentality at the time. So at best, I want to say 1-to-1. At worst, we'll go higher, so 3 times, 2 times, and 1 times. Still, again, because I think Everfest was where that mentality shifted. Okay, these volumes. 200,000, 250,000, 200,000, 150,000, 250,000, 400,000, 450,000, right? And this is where they knew they made a mistake. So for Uprising, it has to be diminished. Again, we go over our little pizza pie, right? Every set that comes out is going to be less applicable to the entirety of play. So although we are ramping up player growth, right, to ramp up the production amount is ludicrous to me. Okay, so for Uprising, 150 to 300,000, right? I would actually change this now with more thought. I'd say it should be between 100,000 to 200,000. Dynasty, again, I think the supplemental sets can be higher, with the exception of Dust Till Dawn. So that being 300,000, that approaching Monarch, this Monarch block range, right? I'm fine with that. Outsiders, again, has to be reduced because Outsiders, is this the right calling? Yes, it is. Right, they line up perfectly. Right, is only 32% of the hero base. And then Dust Till Dawn. Same, I would heavily reduce this. 288,000 is what I settled on. I don't want to see that, right? I would like to see half of that, around 150,000 for Dust Till Dawn. Again, given our little pizza pie, 29% at best, at worst, and then 58% at best. If again, you're insanely generous with the handful of cards. Yes, there was a lot more people opening the product because of the chase, because of serialized art cards, because of the new Marvels, but at the same time, it just would not benefit from, a print volume higher than 200,000. To have that many legendaries floating around, to have that many copies of even the Marvels or anything like that, if we finally discover the pull rates, is just pretty insane when they are highly specialized cards, right? Yes, the Angels are gorgeous to look at. But at the end of the day, we have hammered home how much playability affects the price of cards, right? Yes, Flesh and Blood is collectible, but it is a playable game first, right? Prices heavily reflect that. Heck, Bright Light's coming out, right, has seen the majority of mechanologist cards just ramp up because of speculation. Because, again, the thought that they could now see greater play. It is very curious to think about. Again, I really expect Legendary Studios to factor these variables in. And, when you think of print runs, right, take those steps. Think about it logically. When it comes to Monarch, again, it having to have a applicable ratio where the first edition is greater than the Unlimited, right? Even if it is 1-to-1, then that's pretty crazy to think about in terms of the normal box prices or the rainbow foil legendaries and cold foil and fable prices. Same with Tails, same with Everfest. Even at 1-to-1, right? Yes, it's unreleased, but if we eventually get that extra 200,000 boxes of Everfest, right? Even just Tails sitting there at 400,000 out in the world, to then get History Pack 2 next year, where it is introducing these cards back. That's pretty crazy. But then to also factor in that rationale to Uprising, to Dynasty, to Outsiders, to Dusk Till Dawn, to the new set, that we are, right, continuing to segment the card pools despite player growth, right? To have Bright Lights, again, touch competitively 8% of the card base, right? Yeah, you could discount X Heroes because they're Living Legend, sure. Right, who do we take off? 3? Prism, no, because we got a new Prism. Well, actually, I include both, right? But even that, right? You up it to whatever it is, 20%, 30%. Still insane as a core set to then go and say, well, 200,000, that sounds about right given the player population or something like that, right? That's still a lot of copies of, class-specific cards, of niche cards. So I do think it's worth mulling over, thinking about, and considering when we do talk about print sizes and print runs, and I do expect Legendary Studios to be smart enough to understand this, to understand their design, and understand what needs to happen in terms of their production. We need more sets, which is what we're seeing in a year, but less overall product in terms of print run and print size. That is what's going to work for Flesh and Blood going forward, right? To just ramp up production for each set that no longer targets, even if we continue down this path of supplemental sets, no longer incorporating the current state of play, the entirety state of current play, then we need heavily diminished print run sizes. That's my point of view. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, your arguments, right? Definitely worth factoring this in and considering. Again, the total amount of heroes approached. I should graph out the blitz or just the entirety, or just classes, I suppose, right? And then whether or not you're generous enough to say that the subtypes are still highly relevant, or could be worth half a point instead, something like that. Anyway, yeah, Bright Lights. It's an interesting thought. If it is mechanologist only, right? Then the print run does definitely need to be small, in my opinion. Yes, there'll be a lot of interest at release. Yes, it could be like Dusk Till Dawn, could be insanely hard yet, but at the same time, they have the luxury of printing more down the road, right? They need to start small, in my opinion, and go from there. Hope you enjoyed. See ya.